Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, the reason Republicans are talking about her is because the Democrats have propped her up as the supposed next wave of brainiacs inside the Democratic Party. And not only that, because it is good for us to talk about her, because I hope that she's the face of the Democratic Party. I hope that their new face is the Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez wing. The worst thing that could happen for Republicans is for them to run a candidate like Joe Biden. The worst thing that could happen for Republicans is for them to run somebody who can purport to be moderate just long enough to become president of the United States or become senator or congressperson. I'm hoping the Democrats make a big boo-boo here, and they are so blasted out of their mind by Trump's presidency that they move to make Alexandria Ocasio Cortez their darling. Okay, so she was asked yesterday again on Pod Save America, a podcast run by the Obama bros, right? I mean, it's a bunch of Obama people who are running that podcast, and they love her because secretly she represents their id. And she says all the dumb things they wish they could say, but then their super ego kicks in and they say, perhaps I should not say this out loud because it's a stupid thing. She doesn't have any brain-to-mouth filter when it comes to this stuff. So she was asked specifically about how she was going to pay for all of her plans. It did not go well.
You know, they say, how are you going to pay for it? As though they haven't used these same ways to pay for unlimited wars, to pay for trillion-dollar tax cuts and tax cut extensions. They use these mechanisms to pay for these things all the time. They only want to know. It just seems like their pockets are only empty when we're talking about education and investing in human capital in the United States, education, healthcare, housing, and investing in the middle class. All of a sudden, you know, there's nothing left. All of a sudden, the wealthiest nation in the world we're just totally scarce. And we have complete scarcity when it comes to the things that are most important.
Okay, so I do love the fact, and the original question here was, how do you pay for things? And her answer is, nobody pays for things. Thank you, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, for that brilliant exposition on the debt and deficit in the United States. By the way, when she says things like, the only thing we invest in is tax cuts and wars, that's all we invest in. This year, we will spend $4.3 trillion. The federal government will spend $4.3 trillion this year. What percentage of that goes to the military? Any guesses? Any guesses in the room? Any guesses? What percentage of that $4.3 trillion goes to the American military establishment, including the vets? How much of that? Senya, you got a guess? What percent? Okay, Senya says 60 goes to the military. Jess, any guesses on what percentage of the American federal budget goes to the military? Jess? 30. Okay. The answer is 16% of the federal budget goes to the American military. The remainder goes to all of the supposed priorities that we are supposedly ignoring, according to Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. 62% of the entire federal budget goes to mandatory spending under Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The vast majority goes to social welfare programs that Alexandria Ocasio Cortez says we are spending too little money on. The fact is, the amount of money that we spend per capita in the United States on social welfare programs is actually almost on par with that of the European countries and actually surpasses some of the European countries. And we are spending a buttload of money on all of these priorities that she says we are not spending money on. It's just a lie that we're spending it all on quote-unquote tax cuts. First of all, that's not an expenditure. That's me keeping my own money. And then when she says we're not investing in the middle class, understand that when she says that we're supposed to invest in the middle class, what she means is we're supposed to tax the living hell out of everyone who makes more than 30 grand in the United States, and then we'll pass it back to the people at the lower end of the income spectrum for investment in garbage government programs that do not result in higher productivity, higher wages, or higher employment. That is her actual plan. I would love, when people say, would you debate her? I would love to debate her because I have one question for her. Name an industry you would not nationalize. Which ones should the government not run and why? Right, can she name any of them? I have serious doubts. She says she wants to abolish the profit motive. Okay, well then she's going to have to explain how she abolishes the profit motive without abolishing private industry. Or would she just abolish it? Or why does the Democratic Party think this is a good idea? By the way, when she says that we are, what we haven't worried about spending in the past, yes, that's a problem. I'm old enough to remember when Republicans thought it was a problem. I guess now we don't worry about that so much because President Trump's president, so we're supposed to ignore the fact there's a $21 trillion national debt. But that sucker is going to come due. Social Security will be bankrupt in the next decade. Medicare will be bankrupt a decade after that. Okay, these programs are not going to be around. Or if they are around, they're going to require massive cuts or massive taxes. And even so, what I love most is that she says that, we've never had to worry about spending this sort of money before. The kind of money that she's proposing spending is so insane that it makes what we have spent before absolutely obsolete. According to the Mercatus Center, a libertarian-leaning center at George Mason University, they estimated that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan, we talked about this last week, would cost the government $32 trillion over the next decade. But we can actually do a budget exercise using nonpartisan and even left-leaning groups. Vox.com, a left-wing source, they talk about what exactly we would have to pay for single-payer health care, a jobs guarantee, and free college. What exactly would it cost? Well, it turns out that it would cost, according to the Tax Policy Center, it would cost legitimately trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. $42.5 trillion in new proposals over the next decade, on top of the $12.4 trillion baseline deficit. To put this in perspective, according to Vox.com, Washington is currently projected to collect $44 trillion in taxes, in revenues, that's what they call it, over the next decade. Okay, the Republican tax cut, the fiscal Armageddon, will cost less than $2 trillion over the next decade. So we're going to spend $44 trillion, but Alexandria Ocasio Cortez says the real problem is those tax cuts that quote unquote cost $2 trillion. What is the 30-year projected tab for these programs that they're talking about? The 30-year projected tab is, I kid you not, $218 trillion on top of an $84 trillion baseline deficit driven by Social Security, Medicare, and the resulting internet costs. Federal spending, which is typically between 18 and 22% of GDP in the United States, would soar past 40% of GDP on its way to 50% of GDP within 3 decades. And she says, oh, well, we've never had to worry about spending before. Well, it turns out if you quadruple the spending, you might have to worry about it a little bit more. If you got a $10,000 credit card debt, and then you decide to rack up another $40,000 of credit card debt, maybe you ought to think about whether the original debt was a good idea, but quadrupling it is an even better idea. Okay, we'd be at 60% of GDP by that point. Okay, within 3 decades. State and local government spending would push the total cost of government, according to Sanders and Ocasio Cortez, all the way to 60% of GDP. 60% of every buck made in the United States would be spent by the federal government, exceeding the current spending level of every single European country. And this is their big idea? This is what they think is going to win them elections? Good luck. Good luck.